Morning, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of the Global Bildung Day. Happy Equinox. Welcome to people from around the globe. We are the Global Bildung Network. I am Robert McTagg. I'm joined by Lena Rachel Anderson and Bob Bungie. And we are going to start today with the Oceania Culture Zone. And it's our first event in our almost full day of activities. We used to do this for 24 hours. We do it a little bit less now. And we have two speakers in this culture zone today. So just wanted to say, and our first speaker is Rawiri Toya. He's going to speak to us in just a minute. And I just wanted to give a little bit of a context. We used to call this just straight up Global Bildung Day, but we wanted to make the event more open. Decided to call it the Global Meeting on the Equinox. And our overall theme for today is what it means to be human. Just before we get started, though, a little bit of practical Zoom info. The first thing is that we have a Padlet link. What it is, a Padlet is a map that we let everybody who's part of the event today do a little entry to show where they are in the world. And I'll put that link here in just a second. We're going to move on to kind of our question that's going to drive us today. Share the question that we want everybody to consider is, what is stopping us from cooperating better? Now we'll get into our presentations. Our first speaker is Rawiri Toya, coming to us from the Netherlands. He's going to talk to us about Maori culture.
I just need to say a few words of practicalities. Sure. We have also written a paper called ABCDEFGH, What It Means to Be Human. And if you haven't read it so far, I hope you will enjoy the event and everything will make sense anyway, because then there's plenty of time to read it afterwards. But the ABCDEFG and H stand for the things that some things that we need to take into account as we're approaching the really big issues that we're facing as a species. And A is AI, B is biotechnology, C is circularity. Then there's D for demographics, I think, E for education, F for finance, G for global dispersion of knowledge, and H for humanism and humanity. And as you may have noticed, there's 8 letters and there are 8 sessions today. So we will focus on AI and biotech in the next session. And then we'll have Rawiri, not from the Netherlands, but from New Zealand, speaking about. Yes, Robert. Good morning, Robert. Rawiri from the Netherlands will open with his perspective on the paper. So thank you, and over to Rawiri.
Yoda, thank you, everyone. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. Yes, my name is Rawiri Toya from New Zealand, so bottom of the Pacific, very small island nation. And I'm going to speak around parts of the paper, and in particular, sort of focus on who possibly threats, to do with education, which is my background here in New Zealand. However, I'm wanting to look at my kōrero, my discussion through the nature of harmonizing the economy with nature, and I'll do that with 2 parts, and then looking at the dispersion of knowledge, and just bringing an Indigenous view or a Maori viewpoint to that. So first of all, the idea of harmonizing economy with nature, part 1. how do we cooperate with the environment, and what does that mean? So from a Maori Indigenous perspective and our connection throughout the wider Pacific, which is key to framing my discussion and my presentation today, is based around a simple notion of whakapapa or genealogy. And I'd like to take a moment because as a nation, as a Maori nation here in New Zealand, we are in mourning. So we are in mourning of the loss of the Maori king from the end of the month of August. So after a very sudden and event, he passed away. So he's starting to frame this presentation because he was a key member of the wider Pacific in terms of connection and the nature of how we look at we as Māori people and how we cooperate with each other, with the wider Pacific, and with the environment. There's a saying within Te Reo Māori, within the Māori language, when translated, it says, the land is the elder, the environment is the elder, and the people are the junior. And so with that, there comes this challenge of thinking of how can we, as juniors, be the caretaker of something which is the environment and well in state. So from an Indigenous perspective, we see and acknowledge that everything has a spiritual essence and a mauri and a life force. And the nature of how we can cooperate with the environment is to be able to receive and give the right conditions for us to be able to listen to what the environment is telling us. Now, a key part of that we noticed through the recent COVID lockdowns, and how, if given time and the right conditions, the environment can heal itself. And so things get in the way of that. Corporations, big business, political agendas, those sort of things happen in a turn of 3 years, 4 years. But the decisions that they make have an influence and an impact on how we, as Indigenous people, cooperate with each other within the wider Pacific, and also listen to the signs from the environment that allow us to feel their mauri or feel the life essence. So it's a really important from an Indigenous perspective, a Māori perspective, is to understand the relationship and the ebb and flow of what's happening. I said at the beginning that New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, is at the bottom of the Pacific. And so the nature of our connection is via the water. We are moana people. We are people of the ocean. And our relationship with others within the Pacific is by knowing the nature of land, of ocean, and of sky. Which brings me to my second piece, which was around how we are learning in New Zealand to recalibrate how we live according to time and according to the lunar calendar. So if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and you're operating on solar calendar, you are going to experience the seasons at different times than we engage with them in the south. However, if it's spring in the northern hemisphere, what does that mean for us in the south? At the moment, we are running on a calendar which is not of our own. It's a calendar which is guided by the sun. And so when, for example, the new year is being celebrated across the world, and the countdown from 10 through to 1 and fireworks go off, that's in the middle of our summer. It's in the time where we should be, Māori and people in the south, should be working. We should be working on the land. We should be using the sun while it's in the sky the longest, and doing things differently to what's happening in the northern hemisphere. But at times we are dictated through our political mechanisms and through economy to follow this solar calendar. So what's happening, and what are we seeing in Aotearoa and in the Pacific? We are seeing the lunar calendar becoming more of an impact in how we live. In an education space, we are looking at how the moon cycle affects the way that our kids engage with different aspects, whether it's theory, whether it's sporting endeavor, whether it's learning particular things. We have this ebb and flow, and the moon has a major part to play within that. And so we are starting to see here in Aotearoa, in New Zealand, and also within the Pacific, the nature of the new year rising of Matariki. Some call it Seven Sisters. It's named Matariki up in the higher Pacific, but it's the nature of these stars that rise, which are giving us more of an indigenous view of what we should be doing in the southern hemisphere. And so we are starting to learn more about how we can cooperate with the land, with the oceans, with the sky, and also with our neighbors, to be able to focus on particular things that are common within ourselves, within our relationship of our islands. So it's the idea and notion of following a calendar which quite often has no relevance to us. We've been doing for hundreds of years. And so it's only now, recently in the last 10, 20 years, where we're starting to reconceptualize this approach. And that's where we are at the moment. It's a new learning based on the lunar calendar. Finally, it would be remiss of me to not look at the nature of indigenous knowledge systems in relation to how it's shared, in relation to how it's used, and in some way, the nature of how it's being harvested. We are currently going through huge discussions, wānanga discussions, around how our knowledge is being used and captured in online digital AI. And the question for us is, how do we maintain the integrity of our practices if that knowledge, which quite often is only partial, because we're still learning and gathering a lot of our knowledge, which has been lost over the last however many hundreds of years. And so by reclaiming our knowledge systems, we're asking ourselves, how do we maintain the integrity of those before openly sharing that with the wider world? I don't have the answer for that. That's where we are currently. But what we know is once it's held online, once it's open, then the sovereignty of this knowledge is available and gone from us. Not gone in terms of lost forever, but in terms of being able to look into and look deeper at learning about who we are. We are a fairly new country and new society compared to a number of others across the world. And so it's important that we allow ourselves an opportunity to learn about ourselves within the space before opening it up to everyone else. There is a fear. There is a fear that some of our intellectual knowledge will be taken and used in ways which our ancestors didn't foresee. And so we are trying to find a balance and find our own equinox within that space to allow for a different way of engaging and cooperation. So our first sphere of influence is with the wider Pacific and Oceania. Followed by that is the next step going into the wider Southern Hemisphere and then beyond. That is the challenge. That is where we're looking and where we need to examine the nature of cooperation. I hope everyone's looking forward to engaging with that over the wider day. From an Indigenous perspective, from a place which is almost at the bottom of the world compared to a number of other countries that are going to be speaking today, an Indigenous view, a view that links to the nature of Maori or life essence is within mountains, within rivers, within sky, within both the inanimate and those that are living. That's part of our belief. It's probably one of the connections we have with a number of Indigenous cultures across the country. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Thank you very much. And I'll hand it back to you, Robert and Lenny.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. Now we are sending everybody out into breakout rooms to discuss what we just heard, what we learned from that, and what kind of questions we would like to ask Roberi when we come back. And I have set the breakout rooms to 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, you'll come right back in here in the main room, and we will keep Roberi here, because if we send a speaker out into one of the breakout rooms, he's probably just going to be talking all the time, or you're just going to keep asking him questions. We want you to interact with each other. So have fun. I don't know if you know any of the people you're going to meet there, but it's usually very interesting. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. All right. So we got people coming back from the breakout rooms.
Welcome back, everybody. And we had one person join us just a minute ago as well. Just concluded our first session and had our breakout rooms. What we're going to do now is, since we have a relatively small number of folks, we'll let folks ask their questions that they came up with in the breakout room to Rawiri on the microphone instead of putting them all in the chat. Obviously, we'll go one at a time. And anybody want to start? Anyone have the burning question they want to ask first?
Yeah, can that be me?
Sure.
Perfect. As we were talking in the breakout, one of the questions that we all agreed on is the first one that I came up with is how can, as a society, are we able to cooperate, especially when people around the world are separated by nationalistic, religious, and political ideologies. So like, how can we find a universal concept in cooperating with each other to make society a better world?
Tough one for Rawiri.
Great question. Well, it is, but it isn't. We're actually going through a very similar approach, or asking ourselves that exact question, but of course at a micro space here in New Zealand, because New Zealand's made up of a number of tribes. It's a tribal area, and each tribe has its own. They call it mana motuhake. It's a way of self-determination. It wants to determine its language, its what's important to it, its values. And there are some similarities within there, but there are also the unique differences. Now, I mentioned before that we're in mourning because of the passing of the Māori king. And his passing happened 9 days after we celebrated his 18th year coronation. And he was forwarding or promoting a term called kotahitanga, which is around this nature of unity. So kotahitanga is to be one, or to act as one. Now, underpinning that is the idea that I don't have to give up who I am within this idea of kotahitanga, within this idea of oneness, in order for me to engage with, speak with, and have discussions and come to agreement on particular things. It doesn't make anything that I have any less. Now, for some of the people in New Zealand, and in particular the political parties and the aspects of things that are driving a lot of the economy, are not necessarily buying into this. They like particular groups separated for whatever reason. Picking people off is usually the big one down here. But the nature of oneness and the nature of kotahitanga, as articulated by the late Māori king, actually went through the whole Pacific. And so the wider Pacific Forum, we're in agreement on the nature of being able to look after the tohora, or the whales, and understand how we as a community can come together on particular things. Now, I think there has to be, the response is, you have to start somewhere. And the key thing is, I don't have to give up my identity and who I am and my values in order for me to step forward and be part of the wider community and the wider global community. But it takes courage, and it also takes a deep understanding of who you are. Because if you don't understand who you are, then it's quite often hard for you to see your value at times within the wider discussion. So I'll leave it there. Someone else might have something else.
If you have time, Rawiri, thank you so much for your presentation. It was absolutely fascinating, and we were talking about how much we had learnt about your peoples from our different parts of the world. I'm in the UK, and the question was asked of me, how much did we learn about you when I was growing up at school? Absolutely nothing, I'm shameful to say.
Yep.
Everything we learned was from encyclopedias and printed documents that in later life we've since learned to question as to whether they're accurate or not. So the internet did open up the world to us with all of its dirtiness as well. And I'm just wondering if you may answer me, how interested are your peoples and others that you know of in across the Pacific Islands to understand and know what's happening outside and the wider world and the Western world? Is it of interest, do you feel, or is there less interest than you would have hoped for?
Oh boy, kia ora, thank you for that question. When I was growing up and when I was in school, all we learnt about were the monarchy and everything in Europe. That is what we learnt. We learnt about the different wars and the different peoples and everything that happened in the Northern Hemisphere. That was part of our curriculum. It's only been in the last 40 years that we've started learning about ourselves and our own community, both in New Zealand, within the nature of the tribal areas and the wider Pacific, because that wasn't privileged within the education system and curriculum that I came through. What we've done, and I talked about this, kind of touching on the nature of changing the way we engage with time and moving from a solar calendar to lunar, is understanding our place in the world and understanding how things, what we think and how we bring these and evolve is different. Now, that doesn't take away that we want to be able to engage globally and to be part of the wider global community, because one part of that is about understanding and learning about how others think. Now, the challenge with that is quite often, and you're exactly right, from what you heard about us, either on internet or in books, may not actually be the most authentic articulation of who that people are. And we're probably the same with trying to understand what's happening with people in the wider globe. But I think if you ask people, Māori from Aotearoa and also through the Pacific, one, they're interested in reclaiming their own histories, their own narratives, and their own language in particular, because quite often that was the first thing that was lost through colonization. Kia ora.
I just say thank you very much, and I will have great privilege to actually be coming to New Zealand next year, and it will be, I'm looking forward to it, but thank you so very much.
We've actually just come out of a week. So a week's been identified as being, this is the Māori Language Week. And this was the week that across the country, through media, through Parliament, through everywhere, people are supported and encouraged to use te reo Māori, use the Māori language. And that's not to say that it's not used at other times through the year, but this is a time to celebrate that. And it's an opportunity across this week that we've just finished, just come out of, is to encourage both Māori and non-Māori to be able to engage and use the language and hear the language and feel the language in a way which is supported. And one of the things is not to be put off through some of the pronunciation, and for words that you don't know, it's about celebrating the language that you do know. And a number of cities, a number of parts around the country, roads, all that sort of stuff, they are in Te Reo Māori. They are in the Māori language. That is the name of the road. And so people are encouraged to work on their pronunciation. And so that's what happens through, it's the week we've just come out of.
Owen, looks like he has a question.
Yeah, so sorry, I had
Oh.
some trouble turning my mic on. I'm on the bike at
Okay.
the moment. Yeah, I have a question. One thing that popped up in our group was the relation with AI, and I'm very curious when it comes to indigenous knowledge, what your perspective is on AI and appropriation. So that would be the question for you, kind of, how does AI, is it, what possibilities and what troubles do you see there?
Yeah, thank you for that. We've got a couple of people in New York at the moment that are part of the Times Magazine top 100 people for AI, and they have been working on a program that teaches the computer how to speak Te Reo Māori in the different dialects. And so one of the things and the reasons why they did that was because of the lack of fluent teachers to be able to engage and to teach our kids within school. And so this is where AI can come and support the further learning of Te Reo Māori, of the Māori language within that space. Where it becomes an area for discussion and with some not settled in terms of how our thinking is when we have particular historical documents. We're talking about songs, stories, photos, images of our ancestors, and how they become available or made available online. And then once they're made available online, people can go and take their faces off and put someone else's faces on. That's recently happened over the last month or so, where we've had that an image of a Maori warrior holding a taiaha and doing the haka, and the face has been taken off, and someone else from another culture, their face has been superimposed within that space, and they go through that as an avatar. So it's the challenge is, how do we ensure, again, going back to the nature of the integrity of our culture and our work, and the appropriation of how that can be safeguarded. As I said in my presentation, we don't have the answers for that. That's something that's directly in front of us at the moment, that we're wanting to engage in discussion, in particular with those bigger companies and corporations who either are funding that or are doing work within that space. I don't think we can't be fearful of it, because it's here and it's now, but we need to understand it better in order to find our place and find how we can share or not share, hold the integrity of particular pieces and particular works or artifacts, if that makes sense.
Great. Excuse me. Owen, did you also have a question you wanted to ask? I think we've got time for one more.
Okay. Yeah, I was interested in your talk about the lunar cycles and moving to a lunar sort of model as it related to education. And I wondered if you could talk a little more about what you see as the future of education, as it relates to kind of a return to natural systems.
Certainly. The one part, I'm mindful of the time, but the one part I will talk about is the nature of how and when we do particular assessment activities. So when our students are being tested, there's the nature of if it's physical or if it's theoretical mind, all that's in theory, that sort of stuff. So there are particular moon phases that our energies are more alert and stronger for particular pieces and for particular assessments and times. So if you're looking at the lunar cycle, you wouldn't be setting particular assessments in a certain phase, certain moon phases, because your attention, the way that your energy, the way that you're engaged with whether it's a theoretical or something to do with the mind, is not, you're not at your best at particular times of a month. So you'd set those assessments for the times where you are, or our kids are, at their best energy, at their best focus. We want to be able to set up our tamariki, our kids, so that they're successful at something, not just to fit in a time frame where they get allocated a particular mark. And that mark may not necessarily be a clear picture of what they can do. And so it's the nature of assessment as well. You know, what are we assessing? Why are we assessing? And what is it going to be used for? But the lunar cycle is has a huge impact, and that's what we're looking at the moment, around where the best time each month or a particular month you're able to be at your best. We want you to be at your best. And that's the critical part. Thanks for the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Some great questions. Ruwiri, thank you once again. Always a great presentation and talk when we have you here. We're privileged to have you here. Folks, we are our next speaker is here. One tiny little announcement, which is that if you just joined us or have joined us since we started, there's a link in the chat for a Padlet map. We'd like you to give us a little hello and put a little mark on the map to tell us where you're coming to us from. Now our next speaker is also coming from to us from New Zealand. I got it correct that time. And it's Gareth Hughes. He's going to speak to us about well-being economy.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, I'm greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. E whānau mai o e te taha o te awa Tarawhiti Gisborne, hiuri ahau no Wales, Scotland, o ke ki te noho o ke te whanganui o Tara Wellington, ko Gareth Hughes toku ingoa. So I just greeted you in New Zealand's first language, Te Reo Māori. I introduced where I'm from, which is Tarawhiti Gisborne. My ancestry is Welsh and Scottish. I now live in the capital city, Wellington, and I acknowledged Rauri in this presentation before. I've got 10 minutes to talk to you about what I think is one of the most important issues and areas we can be working on, which is how do we get the economy working in service of people and te taio, or nature, or the environment. At the moment, it feels like it's people and planet in service to the economy. How do we reshape that and have that working the other way around? I want to introduce myself and how I've come to this work. I'd like to talk about the Global Wellbeing Economy Alliance, our work here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and some key policies that might be able to help us get closer to a reshaped economy. So I come to you today having spent 25 years trying to make a better world, and I've used every tactic possible. I've led marches up the main street in Auckland. I've led court cases and inquiries and petitions. I served a decade as a member of parliament in New Zealand with the Green Party. And I realized that I've been spending a lot of those years focused on the symptoms, child poverty, climate pollution. Really, where we need to, I believe, collectively put our efforts is redesigning the economic system so we aren't causing those problems by design, by default. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance was formed in 2018 when leading new economy thinkers such as Kate Raworth, the founder of Donut Economics, Tim Jackson, Dr. Catherine Trebek, and many others who came together globally, realizing there was more that united than separated new economy thinkers. There was a clear, urgent global need to reshape economic systems, particularly when you look at the global poverty, the planetary boundaries which are being breached, climate change being probably the most prominent. And that was the catalyst for the formation of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We're a time-limited movement, a coalition of individuals, organizations, even governments such as New Zealand, which was a foundational member joining alongside Iceland, Finland, and others. We're an alliance of academics, of policymakers who we connect. In Aotearoa, we've been running for a few years now with this mission to reshape the economy around people and planet. In New Zealand, when you look at some of our statistics, such as the fact we use more than almost any other country in the world, a fair share of the atmosphere to dump our pollution. We have the 5th highest per person emissions in the developed world. When you look at how our wealth is being shared in New Zealand, and we are a wealthy country, but if the wealth of New Zealand was split into kai, or plates of food, when you divided the wealth of New Zealand into 10 plates of food for a table of 10 diners, one diner would have 5 plates of food in front of them, 4 would have 1 plate each, but the other remaining 5 at the other end of the table would have to share a single plate amongst them. So we're not seeing a sustainable or a just and fair economy. We work on research, we work on promoting solutions, and importantly, we work on bringing people together with a vision how we can transform the economy. Where I'm seeing the real leadership in this space in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is in Te Ao Māori or Indigenous approaches. I'd love to share a few examples which I know my colleagues around the world see as inspiring and a pathway forward. The first thing I would mention is last year I was going to do a national speaking tour around New Zealand, talking about all the exciting new ideas and policies and case studies we're seeing internationally. But then I got some good advice, which was to flip it on its head. And why don't you actually go around the country and talk to ordinary people about their views and their aspirations, the values they want to see in the economy. So I did that, spent 6 weeks on the road in a camper van, hearing from a representative sample of New Zealanders in big towns and small. And what I heard is that the current economy aren't seeing these ordinary human values being expressed of care, of compassion, of connection to nature. But where we are seeing those expressed right now, in practical terms, is in Māori entities in New Zealand. Some of you may be aware of the pioneering legal personhood for Te Urewera, near to where I'm from on the east coast of the North Island, or the Wanganui River that's been granted legal personhood in statute. And that was a privilege for me to vote for that and support it in Parliament. We see other concepts such as the ability to think longer term and intergenerationally. When you point to many of the crises which we're talking about globally today, such as new technologies, climate change, education, others have called it the polycrisis. What we need to do is make sure we're thinking of future generations. I can point you to the Wakatu Incorporation, the largest employer in the top of New Zealand's South Island, which doesn't just have a quarterly or annual business strategy, they have a 500-year strategy. And likewise, the first urban bird sanctuary in New Zealand, which I live down the road from in the capital city, Wellington, again, following, has a 500-year strategy. We see other examples, such as in the public policy space with He Ara Waiora. Many of you may have heard of New Zealand's wellbeing budgets under the previous government and the living standards framework that underpinned it. I don't want to go into the detail because I would need several hours to go through all that detail. But one of the most inspiring iterations of that underlying policy-making framework was He Ara Waiora, created by Dr. Sasha McMeeking and others. Here is a model for public service that puts the spirit and the connection to nature right at the heart of what it means to be delivering on behalf of your citizens in a democratically elected government. I would urge people to look at He Ara Waiora, which is an incredible framework. I mentioned Kate Raworth's pioneering new economics framework, Donut Economics, which allows us to visualize where we're not meeting social flaws, and this can be displayed for countries, and when we're breaching those planetary boundaries. Here again, we see Indigenous approaches, I think, taking this to the next level and providing global inspiration. Taina Boasadine from Tuhoi reimagined the Māori perspective, and what Taina did was effectively invert that donut. Instead of the environment, our planet, being a hard boundary we can't breach, something external and distant to us, she put it right at the heart of her reimagining of the donut, reflecting the deep connections we have to the environment and the need to have an economy that's grounded in planetary boundaries. But I think she's turning that to a strengths-based approach. That deep connection actually nourishes us and regenerates our souls. So I'm almost at about time. I wanted to introduce some of our work, some of the areas where New Zealand isn't doing too well, but some areas where we can take a lot of hope and inspiration for the future. I'm looking around the world at the moment as well, joining you on the global equinox, looking at where my ancestors have come from with Wales and the world-leading first Future Generations Commissioner, which was appointed in Wales in 2015, a champion for thinking long-term and intergenerationally, which we're leading some work to see if that could be applied here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So greetings from Aotearoa. I wish you the best for the global equinox, and I'm looking forward to seeing other speakers and participating in discussion. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have some other breakout rooms waiting for you for a brief discussion of what we just heard, what we learned, and what we would like to ask Gareth. And we've set the breakout rooms for 15 minutes again, and there are only great people in the rooms, I promise that. And you won't meet exactly the same people as you met the last time. So there are new faces and new opinions that you can meet. And I'm gonna send you out there. We're gonna keep Gareth and Rawiri here in the main room, because if we send the speakers out into the breakout rooms, they're probably just gonna keep talking, or people are gonna ask them about all kinds of stuff that they should ask them in the main room. So see you in 15 minutes and have fun. Thank you, Gareth. Really glad you could join us. And so your background is not Maori at all. I mean, it's European, and you learned the language?
No. You're right. I have European ancestry, but one of the wonderful things about New Zealand is the increasing usage of Te Reo Māori language.
I mean, we just talked about that before you got here. So you were born in New Zealand?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Well, kia ora, Gareth. We were just talking about the we're just coming out of the Māori Language Week. I was just explaining to the viewers around the different ways we're supporting the use of Te Reo Māori across the country, and trying to hit all demographics and do it in a way which is sort of inclusive and provides an opportunity for discussion around, you know, the learning of the language and that sort of stuff here. So
yeah.
Welcome back from the breakout room.
Hello. Welcome back, everybody. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow folks to ask the question directly on the mic. We'll start with one. Just a brief thing to mention for folks who've been joining us later. We also have a Padlet link to put where you are on the map that's in the chat for folks who won't be talking, whatever, and it's something you can do during this time. So we're going to get right to it and ask if anybody has their burning question from the breakout they want to ask first.
Do you mind if I ask the MP my first question, if that's okay with you, Robert?
That would be fine, please.
Yes, to Garrett is his name, right? The one that was speaking.
Gareth? Yep.
Yeah, yes, Garrett. Yes, hi. My name is Enrique Sanchez, Spanish United. One of the questions that I have for you, you being MP, is like, what incentives can government give to people, especially when they want to transition from a fossil fuel economy to more of a hydroelectric or greener economy? Because, like, for example, in my state of California, we are one of the leaders in leading transition from fossil fuel to more of a electrical, greener friendly economy. What incentives can governments around the world provide for people, especially those like in developing countries, that they could have a greener economy at the same time it could also generate jobs for the people?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Enrique. And just to clarify, I'm no longer a serving member of parliament. We've had some good policies, but also some, I think I need to be frank about it, some backward steps recently. So one of the major policies I worked on and succeeded under the previous government was getting a ban on offshore oil exploration. Basically, tackling climate change, we need to leave some fossil fuels in the ground if we want to have a safe climate future. This is what the International Energy Agency and others recommend. So New Zealand put in place one of the world's first bans on future offshore oil and exploration. Coupling that, however, was the development of a just transition. This was support for those affected communities, that they would be given advice, training to transition away from the fossil fuel economy. And this happened. It was led by our Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And unfortunately, as you may have seen, if you follow New Zealand politics, is that both those policies have been cancelled by our incoming, more conservative government. So to my mind, that's a real missed opportunity, because we have to support communities, be it in New Zealand or be it in other countries around the world, to transition to a low carbon economy. For those in the global south, I would say that there's a great opportunity there, because of the price of solar and batteries is absolutely plummeting, dropped more than 99% since the early development of it, and every year it gets cheaper. There's the ability to jump over the expensive infrastructure that the global north has invested in. And really, this is a question of capital at this point. We know with renewables, they have much lower operating costs than fossil fuels such as coal and gas, but it's the upfront cost that is the real barrier. And this is where capital and the power of finance, I think, is critical. When you look around the world, we're spending $7 trillion on fossil fuel subsidies for production and consumption. If we pivoted that and invested that in just transitions and renewable energy, people would be better off. And it would be a better outcome for the climate. So this is, I think, a key message that we need to be sharing, those who want a safe climate future, and looking at some of the inspirations where successful climate policies have been enacted, such as the United States. Now, I note there, it was under the name of inflation reduction was the narrative to get that legislation through there. And I think we have an opportunity, given inflation and cost of living affecting many countries, that going to renewables is actually saving people money in the here and now. We've recently had a report published in New Zealand showing that if we didn't import as much fossil fuels and provided that through renewable electricity, we could be saving $95 billion a year. So great question, a huge opportunity for countries like mine and all countries around the world.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
I would like to maybe just express my that I'm impressed by the 500-year strategy notion. And I don't know if I used to be a strategy consultant, and there is a process you go through. You have your profit loss calculation for the next 5 years, and it blows my mind that a community can commit to 500 years. And I'm wondering how the commitment is manifested, or how do you manage that process? There must be some other kind of governance that I have not seen before, and I'm very curious how that is done.
Gareth, before you answer that, I'm Monique from Australia, and I had exactly the same thought as Jens, and particularly being in Australia across the ditch from you, and the history of our countries of Western Europeans only having been here less than half that time of 500 years. So the mind that I'm really curious because it's a great time scale to contemplate more than double Western time in the countries that you and I reside in.
Yeah, g'day Monique, from across the ditch from New Zealand as well. And look, I think, from a perspective of Australia, with Indigenous inhabitants living on the continent for 40 to 60,000 years, I think you have a deep appreciation for time, your genealogical linkages, which Rawiri talked about, and that long-term approach. I think you can also see examples of this in other countries. Japanese are famous for planting trees knowing they won't be needed for 500 odd years in the future, and reflecting on my ancestry as well, that deeper connection pre-industrialization. My ancestors there would have been thinking longer term and more deeply connected to the nature. In the case of Wakatoan Corporation, it was, I think, good relationships and a good approach. Economics is my passion and where I work now. And another example I might share with you is that Tuhoi, a tribe in the near where Rawiri lives, who never signed our founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi, recently published a report with our Ministry of Business, Innovation, Employment, looking at their perspectives on the economy. One of the great concepts I discovered there that links with that idea of longer term thinking is that the common use of discount rates in economic and public policy, these basically guide decisions that people are making today and their impacts or benefits in the future versus the cost today. If you use a high discount rate, which is what New Zealand does, the benefits in the future are not really captured at all. What Tuhoi reported in their report was that they don't feel that discount rates apply to them. They don't discount the interests of future generations. They see them as present today. So for a country, struggling with a bit of an infrastructure crisis and a lack of good modern infrastructure, this sort of old approach to discount rates has really held us back. But again, this is where I see the leadership happening here.
Thank you.
Anybody else? We can maybe get one more in. And if not, what we're going to do is actually go back to the very beginning when we had our lead question for the day. But I'll just really quickly, does anybody else wanted to get one more breakout question in very quickly?
Actually, I just want to pick up on the question, the initial question around, the nature of 500 years and then that planning. If we look at the nature of how our history and how our stories are passed down through song and through music and through the vibrations of generations, then we look beyond who we are and how we are in the present. And we empower ourselves to look beyond our next lot of mokopuna or our next lot of grandchildren. And you put yourself in a space where you're not bound by any political agenda. You're not bound by any particular economic agenda of where you are in the current space. You are thinking about how and why our existence is important and what that should look like for the 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generations down the road. If you're thinking about that, then you're making what we're calling at the moment mokopuna decisions. You're making decisions about the grandchildren who are not even born yet. And it allows you and empowers you to pull back from your own rhetoric and your own bias. and it makes you think deeper about your purpose and about the purpose of your language, your culture, and where you want that to be in 100 years, in 500 years. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Great. That was, I was inspired by that. Just the answer, the question was great, of course. Folks, we have a couple minutes left. Lena, did you want to speak before we throw the last question up, or did you want to?
No, there was somebody who wrote me in the chat and asked what time in their time zone somebody else is going to speak later today. And as I already explained, I'm running this from an old laptop with Windows 7, so I don't dare leave Zoom. So if somebody could please share the program page in the chat. There is now in the program page a button you can click, and it takes you to a time zone converter. And then you enter the time from the event you want to join and the city that you're in, and it will show you what time the event that you're specifically looking at will be in your time zone. Organizing these first called Global Bildung Day and now the Global Meeting on Equinox for the past 3 years. This is the seventh time we do it. I have developed a new thing. It's called time zone anxiety, which means that when you plan a thing for traveling around the globe with 18, 24 more speakers perhaps, and people joining, it's really a puzzle to get everything straight. And Robert, who's a former military guy, has done a great job of checking all the times and time zones. So please go to the website if you want to know when something particular is going to happen. But please also just join the whole thing. We're going to be here for another 16 hours, and it's going to be a lot of fun with a lot of presentations. So that was my second to last comment before we leave.
Okay, folks, we do have a couple minutes, and there's a couple things. I'm going to share where we started today. We had a question, we had a lead question, and I had asked folks to write them down instead of putting them in the chat. Now we want you to put them in the chat because we're going to collect those. We're going to record this whole thing.
So about the question, may I have the chance to spend some words?
We have 1 or 2 minutes left before we close down the session. So a quick question. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I'm very positive about the situation because there's a book called Scientific Revolution, maybe you know Stephen Shapin. And he says that at the Renaissance, after the Middle Ages in Europe, there was no such thing as a great cooperation of people who are doing the Renaissance in Europe. So all the people around Europe, very individual works, when we look at the history, those individual works, when we take the sum of it, the result of the sum of it, it gives us the Renaissance. So even if we feel or not do cooperate well or not in those kind of situations, I think every individual working for the with the mind and efforts about the problems does signify so many things that maybe in the future, if we will, maybe people will look at they say probably there was no some kind of unified movement as a Renaissance today, but we are doing, everybody's doing something, and the sum of it may be called again another Renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for joining. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for writing in the chat. We will be right back in just 5 or 10 minutes. Same link, same venue, and then we will visit East Asia. And there we're going to hear about AI and tech and what it means to be human from an East Asian perspective. We're going to hear about the cooperatives and how people do take private initiative in the existing economy to change things, both consumers and farmers in Korea. And then we're going to hear about matrifocal money, how we can change the money system. So that will be in about 14 minutes, 15 minutes. So see you then. And Robert, thank you so much for taking us on a tour in Oceania, and see you all in 10 minutes.